My name is India Walker, 32 years old. Despite being a successful graphic designer with my own studio in Manhattan, my family still sees me as the disappointing daughter. At my sister Alice's extravagant wedding reception, surrounded by crystal glasses and perfect white roses, my mother beamed with pride. Looking at me across the champagne tower, she asked the question I had been dreading all night: "When will it be your turn, India?" The room erupted in laughter when Uncle Frank joked, "She's just used material at this point." I simply smiled and said, "It already happened. You just weren't there." The entire room froze. If you've ever had your family miss an important moment in your life, comment below and tell me about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear how my family reacted to finding out I'd been married for 6 years without telling them. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class home in Boston, Massachusetts. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. Dad was a successful accountant, Mom taught elementary school, and we lived in a colonial-style house with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Buddy. But inside those walls, there was always an unspoken hierarchy that placed me firmly in second place. Alice came into the world 4 years after I did, and from the moment she arrived with her perfect curls and infectious laugh, she became the center of our family universe. While I was quiet and introspective with a passion for drawing and reading, Alice was outgoing and charismatic. She was the kind of child who could walk into a room and instantly charm everyone. "Look how social Alice is," my mother would gush at family gatherings while I sat in the corner with my sketchbook. "She gets that from my side of the family." When I was 12 and made the honor roll for the 3rd time in a row, my parents promised to attend the awards ceremony. I pressed my best dress the night before and practiced my acceptance speech in the mirror. But on the morning of the ceremony, Alice's dance instructor called to say she had been chosen for a special showcase. "India, you understand, don't you?" Mom said, straightening Alice's tutu. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for your sister." I nodded and said it was fine. But the truth was, my opportunities always seemed less important than Alice's. I accepted my certificate alone while other kids had their parents taking photos and bringing flowers. That night, our refrigerator gained another program from Alice's dance recital. While my certificate ended up in a drawer with all the others, art became my refuge. In the pages of my sketchbooks, I created worlds where I mattered, where my voice was the loudest in the room. By the time I reached high school, I had developed a distinctive style that caught the attention of my art teacher, Mrs. Lowry. "You have a gift, India," she told me after class one day, holding up my portfolio. "Have you thought about art school?" When I brought home college brochures for art programs, my father frowned. "Art isn't practical, India. What about business or education?" Meanwhile, Alice's every interest was celebrated. When she decided she wanted to try modeling at 14, my parents hired a professional photographer and drove her to castings 3 hours away. When she mentioned law school in passing, my father spent an entire weekend researching the best pre-law programs. My relationship with Alice was complicated. I loved her deeply, she was my little sister, after all, but there was always a current of jealousy and hurt running beneath our interactions. She never asked to be the favorite, and in many ways, she was oblivious to the imbalance. She would bound into my room to show me her latest trophy or certificate, genuinely expecting me to share in her excitement. Not realizing that each of her successes only highlighted what our parents saw as my failures. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the refrain of my adolescence, spoken and unspoken in equal measure. Why couldn't I be more outgoing, more traditional in my interests, more eager to please? The feeling of being unseen, unheard, and unappreciated grew deeper with each passing year. I started to believe that perhaps I was simply less worthy of love and attention. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made me undeserving. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother, my mother's mother, Martha. She had been an artist in her youth before giving it up to raise her family, and she recognized the same spark in me. "You remind me of myself," she told me one afternoon while we sat in her garden, me sketching the roses while she knitted. "But you're braver than I ever was. Don't let anyone dim your light, India. Not even family." Grandma Martha kept every drawing I gave her, framing them and hanging them proudly on her walls. When I visited her apartment, I felt valued in a way I never did at home. She would make me tea in her special china cups and ask to see my latest work, listening intently as I explained my inspirations and techniques. "Your sister may be the sun in your family," she said to me once, bright and impossible to ignore. "But you, my dear, are the moon, full of mystery and depth, pulling the tides with a quiet power all your own." Those words became a lifeline during the darkest days of my youth, when the shadow of my sister's perfection threatened to swallow me whole. When I received my acceptance letter to the prestigious Parsons School of Design in New York City, I felt like I could finally breathe for the first time. The scholarship covered most of my tuition, which silenced even my father's practical concerns. My parents drove me to New York. helped me unpack in my tiny dorm room, and then left with quick hugs and reminders to call home regularly. The moment their car turned the corner, a weight lifted from my shoulders. In New York, nobody knew I was Alice Walker's disappointing older sister. Here I was, just India, skilled, talented, and full of potential. My roommate Zoe was a photography major from Seattle who quickly became my first real friend. She dragged me to campus events and introduced me to her wide circle of friends. Through her, I met Daniel during our sophomore year at a student gallery opening. Daniel had warm brown eyes, a passion for photography, and a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the most interesting person he'd ever met. When I showed him my portfolio, he studied each piece carefully, asking thoughtful questions about my process and inspiration. "You see the world differently," he said, "your work has soul." Our first date was at a tiny ramen shop in the East Village where we talked until the owners began stacking chairs around us. With Daniel, I never had to minimize my passion or downplay my ambitions. He didn't compare me to anyone else. He just wanted me to be exactly who I was. My design career began taking shape during my junior year when one of my professors recommended me for an internship at a boutique advertising agency. My minimalist poster series for a local theater won a student competition, which led to my first paid commission. Suddenly, people were willing to pay for what my family had dismissed as an impractical hobby. Each small success felt like vindication. Each project completed, each client satisfied, each positive review was proof that I had been right to follow my passion despite my parents' skepticism. Meanwhile, my relationship with Daniel grew deeper. We spent weekends exploring the city, finding inspiration in museums, street art, and the endless human parade of New York. He taught me photography basics, and I introduced him to graphic design principles. We became creative partners as well as romantic ones. Our relationship was nothing like the dramatic, volatile connections my sister cycled through. There were no grand gestures or public declarations, just a steady, nurturing love that helped both of us grow. Daniel became my safe harbor, the person who celebrated my victories when my family barely acknowledged them. My calls home became less frequent. Whenever I did call, the conversation inevitably turned to Alice, her classes, her social life, her latest boyfriend. If I mentioned a design award or a new client, my mother would make an appropriate sound of acknowledgement before asking, "Have you heard about Alice's internship at the district attorney's office?" During my senior year, I received devastating news. My grandmother, Martha, had suffered a massive stroke. I rushed home to Boston, but by the time I arrived, she was gone. The funeral was small and somber. As we stood by her grave, I felt untethered, as if the one anchor connecting me to my family had been severed. After the service, my mother handed me a small velvet box. "She wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was my grandmother's engagement ring, a delicate vintage piece with a modest diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. Along with it was a note in her shaky handwriting: "Create your own happiness, my moonchild. I'll always be watching." I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling the weight of her love and the promise I had made to her to live authentically, regardless of my family's expectations. That night in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the art my parents never quite understood, I made a decision. I would build a life that would have made my grandmother proud, a life defined by my own standards of success, not anyone else's. When I returned to New York, I threw myself into my final projects with renewed determination. The ring on my right hand served as a constant reminder of the woman who had believed in me when no one else did, and the promise I had made to honor her faith in me. The spring of my third year at Parsons, the school hosted an exhibition for junior and senior students. After months of preparation, my mixed media series examining urban isolation was selected as one of the featured collections. The opening night was a blur of conversations with professors, fellow students, and even a few gallery owners who expressed interest in my work. Near the end of the evening, Daniel led me to a quiet corner where my favorite piece was displayed, a large-scale collage combining photography, digital elements, and hand-drawn components. "This is where I first knew," he said softly. "Knew what?" I asked, tired but happy from the successful event. Daniel dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring with a single emerald, my birthstone. "I knew I wanted to spend my life watching you create beautiful things," he said. "India Walker, will you marry me?" The room seemed to fall away. In that moment, there was only Daniel, his steady gaze, his artist's hands, his unwavering belief in me. I said yes through tears of joy, and our friends, who had gathered discreetly nearby, erupted in cheers and congratulations. That night, giddy with happiness, I called my parents to share the news. I had expected, perhaps, not enthusiasm but at least polite congratulations. Instead, my mother's response was tepid at best. "Engaged already?" She sounded concerned rather than happy. "Honey, you're only 21. Don't you think you should wait until after graduation? get established in your career first. Daniel and I have been together for 2 years. Mom, we're sure about this. Well, she sighed. Your father and I would like to meet him properly before anything is decided. That wasn't what I had expected. Daniel had come home with me for Christmas the previous year. My parents had been polite but distant, spending most of the visit focused on Alice's new boyfriend at the time, a pre-med student named Jason. When I pressed for a reason for their hesitation, my mother finally admitted, it's just that Alice just graduated, and she's bringing Jason home next weekend. He's from a wonderful family, and we think this might be serious. We don't want to overshadow her moment with your engagement news. There it was, the truth. Once again, Alice's life events took precedence over mine. My engagement apparently had the poor timing of coinciding with my sister's new relationship. Actually, my mother continued, brightening, why don't you wait to announce your engagement? Then next summer, we could possibly plan a double wedding. Wouldn't that be special? I hung up, feeling hollow. What should have been one of the happiest moments of my life had been diminished, just like so many others before it. When I told Daniel about the conversation, his normally calm expression hardened. That's not right, India. They're treating our commitment like it's less important than your sister's new boyfriend. We stayed up late into the night talking about family dynamics, expectations, and what marriage meant to each of us. As the sun began to rise over the New York skyline, we reached a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. Let's get married now, Daniel said, holding both my hands in his. Not a big production, not for anyone else, just for us. The two people who matter most in this decision. 2 weeks later, on a bright Friday morning, we went to the city clerk's office. Our witnesses were Zoe and Daniel's best friend, Marcus. I wore a simple white dress I had found in a vintage shop and tucked a blue flower in my hair. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, all in one gesture. As we exchanged vows, I felt my grandmother's presence. The ring she had left me now sat on my left hand. Transformed from a memento into a symbol of my new beginning, Daniel and I wrote our own vows. Promising not just love and fidelity, but also to always see each other truly. To nurture each other's creativity, and to build a home where both of us could flourish. After the ceremony, the four of us went to our favorite restaurant for lunch, drinking champagne and planning our future together. There was no lavish reception, no towering cake, no distant relatives making awkward toasts, but it was perfect because it was ours. We decided not to tell my family immediately. At first, it was about preserving the sacred feeling of those first few weeks of marriage, keeping it as something private and precious between us. But as time passed and my parents continued to center conversations around Alice and Jason, our secret became a form of protection, a way to prevent our commitment from being minimized or dismissed. We'll tell them when it feels right, Daniel assured me. When they're ready to really hear it. I didn't know then that when it feels right would stretch into years. Or that our small act of self-protection would eventually become the catalyst for a long overdue confrontation. After graduation, I accepted a position as a junior designer at Apex Creative, a mid-sized advertising agency in Manhattan. The starting salary wasn't impressive, but the creative director had seen my student exhibition and promised me hands-on experience with major clients. Daniel, who had graduated a semester earlier, was working as an assistant to a well-known architectural photographer while building his own portfolio on the side. We found a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens. At 400 square feet, it was barely big enough for our combined collection of art supplies, photography equipment, and books. But it was ours. We painted the walls ourselves, hung our art, and filled every corner with plants. Our first piece of real furniture was a drafting table we found at a flea market and refinished together. A symbol of our commitment to nurturing each other's creative pursuits. Those first years were lean but happy. We lived on pasta and ambition, staying up late to work on freelance projects or to help each other meet deadlines. Every small success was celebrated with the same bottle of champagne, refilled each time with whatever sparkling wine we could afford that month. By my second year at Apex, I was assigned as lead designer for a campaign for a major cosmetics brand. My minimalist approach and distinctive typography caught the attention of industry publications, and suddenly my portfolio was being shared across design blogs. The creative director took me to lunch and offered me a promotion to senior designer along with a substantial raise. "You have something special," he told me. "A unique voice. Don't lose that." Daniel's career was also gaining momentum. A series of his urban landscape photographs was featured in a group show at a small but respected gallery, which led to commissions from architectural magazines and eventually corporate clients who needed images of their buildings and spaces. 3 years after graduation, we had saved enough for a down payment on a small condo in Brooklyn, a one-bedroom with high ceilings and a tiny second room we could use as a shared studio. The day we signed the mortgage papers, we held hands and stared at each other in disbelief. Two creative people making it work in one of the most expensive cities in the world. We did it, Daniel whispered. We're building our dream. As our careers advanced, so did our collaboration. Daniel's photography business expanded to include commercial work, and I began to bring him in on projects at Apex when clients needed both design and photography services. Eventually, this partnership led us to an idea: what if we created a book together, combining my graphic design with his architectural photography? We spent a year working on urban geometry in our spare time, exploring the lines, patterns, and hidden beauty of New York City. When it was finally published by a small art press, the response exceeded our wildest expectations. The book received positive reviews in design publications and led to our first joint exhibition at a gallery in Soho. By my 30th birthday, I had been promoted to creative director at Apex, the youngest in the company's history. Daniel had opened his own photography studio specializing in architectural and commercial work, with a growing list of high-profile clients. We had moved to a larger apartment with a dedicated studio space and were financially secure enough to start thinking about the future in new ways, possibly starting a family or launching our own creative agency. Together, throughout these years of growth and success, my relationship with my family remained complicated and distant. We visited Boston for major holidays and occasionally for weekends, but the dynamic remained unchanged. My parents were polite about my career achievements but rarely asked for details. Alice, who had finished law school and joined a corporate firm, remained the primary focus of family conversations. "Your sister just made junior partner," my mother would announce proudly during our monthly phone calls. The youngest in the firm's history. If I mentioned a successful campaign or award, she would listen politely before changing the subject. "That's nice, dear. Did I tell you Alice and Jason bought a house in Cambridge? 4 bedrooms. We're hoping they'll fill them soon." The one change in our family dynamic came from Alice herself. As we entered our 30s, she seemed to develop a new awareness of the imbalance in our parents' attention. She began to make more effort to connect with me, calling to ask about my projects or sending articles about design that had made her think of me. Daniel and I never explicitly lied about our marital status to my family. We simply didn't correct their assumption that we were long-term partners who hadn't made it official. During family gatherings, I wore my grandmother's ring on my right hand, transferring it to my left when we returned to New York. Our secret marriage had become a strange comfort over the years, a piece of our life that belonged only to us. Unshaped by my family's expectations or judgments, do you regret not having a big wedding? Daniel asked me once on our 5th anniversary. I thought about it as we sat on our tiny balcony, drinking wine and watching the sunset paint Brooklyn in gold. No, I answered honestly. I regret that my family couldn't see me clearly enough to celebrate our love properly. But I don't regret how we chose to begin our marriage. It was perfect for us. He kissed my hand right over my grandmother's ring. "Someday they'll see you. Really see you. And until then, I see enough for everyone." I didn't know then how prophetic those words would be. Or that the moment of truly being seen was approaching faster than I could have imagined. The ivory envelope arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to India Walker and Daniel Bennett. Inside was an intricately designed wedding invitation announcing the marriage of Alice Walker to Jason Reynolds at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston, complete with a weekend of events leading up to the ceremony. "Wow." Daniel whistled, looking at the heavy cardstock and gold foil details. "This is going to be quite the production." My phone rang almost immediately after the invitation would have been delivered. It was my mother, sounding more animated than I'd heard her in years. "Did you get it? Isn't it beautiful? Alice designed it herself. You know, she's been planning this for months." "It's lovely, Mom. We just opened it." "So, you'll come for the whole weekend, right? The rehearsal dinner is Friday, and there's a brunch on Saturday, then the ceremony Saturday evening, and a farewell brunch on Sunday." I glanced at my calendar, already knowing this would be difficult. I was in the middle of pitching a major new campaign to our biggest client, with presentations scheduled throughout that month. "I'm not sure we can make the whole weekend, Mom. Work is really busy right now. But we'll definitely be there for the ceremony and reception on Saturday." Her disappointment was palpable, even through the phone. "But India, this is your sister's wedding. Surely you can take a few days off. Alice really wants you to be there for everything. She's even asking if you'd do a reading during the ceremony." The guilt trip was familiar territory, but it still worked. "Let me check at work and get back to you," I conceded, knowing I would end up rearranging my professional commitments regardless of the cost. When I called my mother back to confirm we would attend the entire weekend, she had a new request. "Alice was hoping you might come a week early to help with the final arrangements. You're so creative, and she values your eye for design." The irony wasn't lost on me. My artistic abilities, so often dismissed throughout my life, were suddenly valuable when they could serve Alice's needs. Still, part of me was touched that my sister wanted my input. That call was followed by others, each adding new expectations. Could I help assemble welcome bags for out-of-town guests? Would I mind being a bridesmaid, but not maid of honor, since that spot was reserved for Alice's law school roommate? Could I possibly design the program, since I did that sort of thing professionally? As the wedding approached, I found myself juggling my most important work project to date with an ever-growing list of wedding-related tasks. Daniel watched with concern as I stayed up late finalizing presentation boards, then woke early to research Boston florists for my mother. You know, you can say no, right? He said one evening as I frantically revised a design concept while simultaneously emailing a wedding planner. It's not that simple, I sighed. It's Alice's big day. And what about your big project, the one you've been working toward for years? He was right. I had been positioned to lead the rebranding of Luminous, a global technology company, a career-defining opportunity that could open doors to even bigger roles in the industry. But with each passing day, my focus was being pulled toward bouquet selections and seating charts. After a particularly stressful conference call that I had to take from my parents' guest room in Boston, I made a decision. I called Daniel. I need you, I said simply. Can you come early? Not just for the weekend, now. I can't do this alone. 2 days later, Daniel arrived with our suitcases and his camera equipment. I thought I might as well document the week, he explained. And I brought something else. From his pocket, he pulled out my grandmother's ring, the one I wore as my wedding band in New York, but kept on my right hand when visiting family. Maybe it's time, he said quietly. Maybe this is the moment to stop hiding. I looked at the ring, remembering my grandmother's words, create your own happiness. For 6 years, Daniel and I had done exactly that, building a life filled with love, creativity, and mutual respect. Why were we still protecting my family from the truth of our happiness? Let's wait until after the wedding, I decided. This is Alice's moment. But after that, yes, it's time. The days leading up to Alice's wedding were a whirlwind of activity. The ceremony would take place in the grand ballroom of the hotel, transformed with thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers, and custom lighting. The guest list included 300 people, from family members to law firm partners to college friends. Throughout the preparations, my suggestions were consistently overlooked or gently dismissed. When I recommended a local jazz quartet for the cocktail hour, my mother insisted that Alice preferred classical music. When I showed her the program design I had stayed up all night creating, she suggested minor adjustments that essentially changed everything. It's lovely, dear, she said, patting my hand. But Alice was hoping for something more traditional, less artistic, if you know what I mean. I did know. Less like me, more like what she thought wedding programs should look like. Daniel's arrival had been met with polite but cool greetings from my parents. They had always been civil to him, but there was an underlying sense that they didn't quite approve of his career choice, or perhaps of him drawing me further into a creative life they didn't value. And how's the photography business? My father asked over dinner, emphasizing the word in a way that suggested he didn't consider it one. It's excellent, actually, Daniel replied evenly. I just finished a commission for the new headquarters of Atlantic Financial. It will be featured in Architectural Digest next month. Is that so? My father looked genuinely surprised. That's quite impressive. It was the first flicker of real respect I'd seen from him. And it both warmed and saddened me that it had taken external validation from a prestigious publication to earn it. The wedding rehearsal dinner was held at an upscale restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. As we entered, Alice rushed over to hug me, looking radiant in a white cocktail dress. I'm so glad you're here, she whispered. It means everything to have you with me. For a moment, I felt a surge of genuine connection with my sister. Despite the years of imbalance, I loved her and wanted her to be happy. That feeling faded slightly when I discovered that Daniel and I had been seated at different tables. I was with family, while he was placed with distant cousins and friends of Jason's family. When I pointed out the error to my mother, she smiled tightly. It's not a mistake, dear. We thought it would be nice for you to catch up with the family and for Daniel to meet some new people. The implication was clear, Daniel wasn't considered family. Despite being together for 8 years and secretly married for 6, he was still categorized as just my boyfriend. As speeches were made celebrating Alice and Jason's relationship, I caught Daniel's eye across the room. He gave me a reassuring smile, but I could see the hurt beneath it. We were both outsiders here. Our commitment to each other was somehow deemed less significant than my sister's engagement of just over a year. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. The hotel suite where the bridal party was getting ready buzzed with activity, hairstylists, makeup artists, and a photographer documenting every moment. Alice sat in the center of it all, looking serene and beautiful. You look amazing, I told her honestly as a stylist pinned my hair into an elegant updo. So do you, she replied, then added with a laugh, maybe seeing you all dressed up will finally inspire Daniel to propose. The comment stung more than she could know. I smiled weakly and turned away, touching the empty space on my left ring finger where my wedding band usually sat. It was currently in my clutch, waiting for the right moment, a moment that seemed increasingly distant as the day progressed. The ceremony was undeniably beautiful. The ballroom had been transformed into a floral wonderland, with an aisle lined with candles and rose petals. I performed my reading without a hitch, despite the knot in my stomach, and watched as my sister and Jason exchanged heartfelt vows. As they were pronounced husband and wife, I glanced at my parents in the front row. My mother was openly weeping with joy, and my father looked prouder than I had ever seen him. I wondered, not for the first time, if they would have looked that happy at my secret city hall ceremony, the one they hadn't attended, if they would have shown that pride had they been there to see me commit my life to Daniel. With that thought, something shifted inside me, a resolve beginning to form that would change everything. The reception was held in a second ballroom, even more lavishly decorated than the first. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with towering floral arrangements. A 10-piece orchestra played softly as guests filtered in from the cocktail hour, finding their assigned seats. Daniel and I discovered that once again we had been separated. I was seated at a family table near the front, while he was placed at table 23 near the back with distant relatives and friends of Jason's family who couldn't fit at their own tables. This is ridiculous, I whispered to him as we looked at the seating chart. We've been together for 8 years. It's okay, he assured me, though I could see it wasn't. It's just one night. But it wasn't just one night. It was a pattern that had persisted throughout our relationship, my family's subtle but consistent message that Daniel was an accessory to my life, not an essential part of it. I watched from my seat as my sister and Jason shared their first dance. Then, as my father twirled Alice around the floor for the father-daughter dance. And when my mother rose to make her speech, champagne glass in hand, I felt Daniel's eyes on me from across the room. Today is a day I have dreamed about since Alice was a little girl, my mother began, her voice thick with emotion. Watching her grow into the beautiful, accomplished woman she is today has been the greatest joy of my life. And now, seeing her marry Jason, a man who is everything we could have hoped for in a son-in-law, my heart is truly full. She continued praising Alice's achievements, her kindness, her beauty. She told stories of Alice's childhood that painted her as the perfect daughter, stories that conveniently omitted my presence entirely. By the time she raised her glass for the toast, I felt as if I had been erased from the family narrative. To Alice and Jason, she concluded, may your life together be as perfect as this day has been. The room erupted in applause. As the music resumed and dinner was served, I picked at my meal, feeling increasingly disconnected from the celebration around me. At one point, I excused myself to visit Daniel at his distant table, where he was making polite conversation with Jason's elderly great-aunt. Are you okay? He asked quietly, seeing the tension in my face. Not really, I admitted, but I'll get through it. As the evening progressed, I watched my family celebrate the perfect day they had created for Alice. My mother flitted from table to table, accepting compliments on the beautiful wedding. My father beamed with pride every time someone mentioned what a lovely couple Alice and Jason made. And Alice herself glowed with happiness, surrounded by friends and family who had gathered specifically to celebrate her relationship. After the cake was cut and the bouquet was tossed, guests began moving between tables, mingling more freely. My mother found me near the dessert table, her cheeks flushed from dancing and champagne. Isn't this wonderful? She gushed. Your sister's wedding was absolutely perfect. I nodded, forcing a smile. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a confidential tone. So when will it be your turn, India? Daniel's been in the picture for what, 5 years now? 8 years, Mom, I corrected automatically. 8 years. She looked surprised, as if she hadn't been counting. Well, that's certainly a long time to wait. Maybe he needs a little push. Before I could respond, Uncle Frank appeared beside us, drink in hand, ready to add his unwelcome opinion. The problem is that creative types never want to settle down, he said with the confidence of someone who had never actually known any creative types beyond what he saw on television. Always chasing the next project. My mother nodded as if he'd said something profound. India's always been so focused on her career, which is lovely, of course. But there's more to life than work. Other family members began to gather around, drawn by the topic of my apparently pitiful spinsterhood at the ripe old age of 32. Maybe he's waiting for you to make partner at that design place, my cousin Bethany suggested, as if graphic design firms operated like law offices. Or saving for a big ring, another relative offered. Those artsy jobs don't pay much, do they? The comments kept coming, each one more presumptuous than the last. I stood frozen, unable to find words as my family dissected my relationship and career in front of me, making assumptions about both that were wildly off base. Then came the comment that broke the dam. Maybe India's just used material at this point, Uncle Frank joked loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Too independent for her own good. The room erupted in laughter, not malicious, but casual and thoughtless, the kind of laughter that comes at the expense of someone who isn't taken seriously. In that moment, something crystallized within me. I looked across the room and found Daniel's eyes. He had heard the exchange, and I could see both the anger and resolve in his expression. He gave me a small nod, as if to say, "It's time." The laughter was still subsiding when I spoke, my voice calm and clear. "I'm not waiting for anything. It already happened. 6 years ago. You just weren't there." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Uncle Frank's mouth hung open, his joke forgotten. Even the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to pause. "What do you mean, it already happened?" My mother finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my grandmother's ring. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I slid it onto my left ring finger where it had belonged all along. Daniel and I got married during my junior year at Parsons, March 17th, 6 years ago. The date hung in the air between us, my grandmother's birthday. The significance wasn't lost on my mother, whose face had drained of all color. "That's not possible," she stammered. "You would have told us. We would have been there." "Would you?" I asked softly. "When I called to tell you we were engaged. You suggested I wait because you didn't want to overshadow Alice's new boyfriend, the same boyfriend. She married today with a 300-person wedding you planned for a year." Daniel had made his way across the room and now stood beside me, his hand finding mine in silent support. My father pushed through the circle of stunned relatives. "This is inappropriate, India. This is your sister's wedding day." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "And I've spent the entire day being a supportive sister. I've smiled in photos, made a toast, helped Alice with her dress, and not once complained about being seated apart from my husband at every event." The word husband caused a visible ripple through the crowd. Alice had appeared at the edge of the group, Jason beside her, both looking confused by the sudden tension. "What's going on?" Alice asked, looking between me and our parents. "Your sister has just informed us that she's been married for 6 years without telling anyone," my father said, his voice tight with anger. Alice's eyes widened as she looked at me. 6 years? That means since college, I confirmed. "We didn't plan to keep it secret for so long. At first, we just wanted something that was ours, something pure and untainted by—" I gestured vaguely at the scene unfolding around us. "By all of this." "By what?" my mother demanded, finding her voice again. "By family? By tradition? By doing things the proper way? By having our relationship constantly diminished?" Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. "By being treated like India's achievements and happiness matter less." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest in offense. "That is not true. We've always supported India." "Have you?" I asked, years of suppressed feelings finally finding their voice. "You missed my college graduation ceremony because Alice had a summer internship interview the same day. You've never once visited our home in New York in 8 years. You introduced Daniel as my boyfriend to everyone here, even though he's been part of my life longer than Jason has been part of Alice's." The room had gone completely silent. The party atmosphere evaporating as guests tried to pretend they weren't witnessing this family confrontation. The wedding planner hovered anxiously at the edge of the group, clearly wondering if she should intervene. My father's face had darkened with anger. "You've made your point, India, but this was not the time or place. You've deliberately ruined your sister's wedding day, out of what? Jealousy? Spite?" That accusation, so unfair and yet so familiar, hit me like a physical blow. I had spent the entire week helping with wedding preparations, had rearranged my work schedule at great professional risk, had smiled and supported my sister despite being treated as an afterthought, and still I was cast as the villain. I was about to respond when Alice stepped forward, placing herself between me and our parents. "Stop it," she said firmly. "Dad, that's not fair. India hasn't ruined anything." Her defense surprised everyone, me most of all. Alice turned to face me, her expression a mix of hurt and curiosity. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. "All these years." "I tried at first," I admitted, "but every time I thought about it, something would happen, some comment from mom or dad that made it clear my relationship wasn't considered as important. Eventually, it was easier to keep it private than to have it diminished." Alice nodded slowly, processing this. Then she did something completely unexpected. She hugged me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never realized how much we've hurt you." As we separated, she turned to our parents, still standing in shock. "Mom, Dad, this isn't about my wedding. This is about how we've made India feel her whole life. My father shook his head, unwilling to accept this characterization. We've always treated both our daughters equally. No, you haven't, Alice said gently but firmly. I never saw it before, or maybe I didn't want to see it. But India's right. Everything has always been about me, my achievements, my relationships, my needs. Even today, you seated her husband at the back of the room with people he's never met. The word husband from Alice's lips seemed to make it real for my parents in a way it hadn't when I said it. My mother sank into a nearby chair, looking genuinely distressed. 6 years, she murmured. I missed my daughter's wedding. We both did, my father said, his anger deflating somewhat as the reality sank in. Daniel squeezed my hand, and I felt a surge of strength from his presence. You missed it because you weren't ready to see me as an adult with my own life. Making my own choices, the same way you've missed so many important moments in my life. Uncle Frank and the other relatives had retreated, sensing that this was no longer a public spectacle but a private family matter. The wedding planner had tactfully directed the band to resume playing, drawing attention away from our corner of the room. I think, Daniel said quietly, that India and I should go. This is still Alice and Jason's celebration, and we don't want to take away from that. I nodded in agreement, grateful for his steady presence and wisdom. No, Alice said firmly, surprising us again. This is a wedding to celebrate love and family. Both my sister and her husband belong here. She looked at our parents, her expression leaving no room for argument. All of us need to start fixing this right now. In that moment, standing in a ballroom filled with flowers and music, surrounded by the trappings of a perfect wedding, something shifted in my family's dynamic. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not just by Daniel, who had always seen me, or by my grandmother, who was no longer with us, but by my sister, and maybe, just maybe, beginning to be seen by my parents too. Daniel and I left Alice's wedding reception shortly after midnight. Despite her insistence that we stay, the emotional weight of the evening had left us drained. We walked hand in hand through the quiet Boston streets back to our hotel. The city's familiar skyline reminding me of both the distance I had traveled from my childhood home and the unresolved connections that still pulled at my heart. Are you okay? Daniel asked as we entered our room, his voice gentle with concern. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my bridesmaid dress, and considered the question. Was I okay? The secret we had carried for 6 years was finally in the open. The confrontation I had both dreaded and needed had finally occurred. I think so, I answered slowly. I feel lighter somehow, but also sad. Sad about what? About all the lost time. About the fact that it took such a dramatic moment to finally be heard. I twisted my grandmother's ring, now proudly displayed on my left hand where it belonged. I wish she could have been there when we got married. She was the only one who would have truly celebrated us. Daniel sat beside me, taking my hands in his. She was there, India, in the most important way. The weeks following Alice's wedding passed in a strange limbo. We returned to New York in our busy lives, but the familiar rhythm felt different somehow. My phone would light up with text messages from Alice, regular, thoughtful check-ins that had never been part of our relationship before. My parents, however, remained distant, reaching out only through stiff, formal emails that acknowledged our marriage but didn't address the deeper issues we had raised. 2 months after the wedding, my phone rang with an unexpected caller. I'm in New York, Alice said without preamble. Can we meet for coffee? Just the two of us. We met at a quiet cafe near my office, and I was struck by how nervous my confident, polished sister seemed. She fidgeted with her wedding ring, a massive diamond that caught the light with every movement. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, about what you said at the wedding, about growing up together. She took a deep breath. I want to apologize, India, not just for the wedding but for everything. You don't need to apologize, I started, but she shook her head. I do, because I always knew, on some level. I always knew I was treated differently. I saw how Mom and Dad came to every single one of my events but missed your art shows. I noticed how they bragged about my grades but barely mentioned your design awards. I saw it all, and I never said anything. Her candor surprised me. Why didn't you? Because it was easier not to, she admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. Because I liked being the favorite. What kind of person does that make me? A human one, I said softly. We were kids, Alice. It wasn't your responsibility to fix our parents' behavior. Our conversation lasted for hours, peeling back layers of our shared history and examining them from our adult perspectives. Alice revealed her own insecurities, how she had always envied my artistic talents and independent spirit, how she had chosen law partly because it was what our parents valued. I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect daughter, she confessed. It's exhausting. I spent mine trying to prove I was worth noticing, I replied. Also exhausting. We laughed through tears, the tension of decades finally beginning to dissolve between us. As our coffee cups were cleared away, Alice hesitated, then said, "There's something else. Mom and Dad are here in New York. They want to see you, both you and Daniel, to talk." My heart raced at the prospect. I don't know if I'm ready for that. They're trying, India, in their own way. Will you at least consider it? The meeting was set for the following evening at a neutral location, a private dining room at a restaurant near our apartment. Daniel and I arrived first, and I gripped his hand tightly as we waited, fighting the urge to flee before my parents arrived. When they walked in, I was struck by how much older they looked than at the wedding. My father's shoulders seemed stooped with the weight of unspoken regrets. And my mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the fatigue in her eyes. The initial conversation was stilted and awkward, focused on safe topics like the weather and the restaurant's decor. But as our appetizers arrived, my father cleared his throat and addressed the elephant in the room. "We owe you both an apology," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since the wedding. A lot of looking back. And we've realized we made serious mistakes in how we treated you, India, and by extension, you, Daniel." My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. When Alice told us how she had always known she was treated preferentially, it was like a bucket of cold water. "We never intended to make you feel less valued, India. We never understood you the way we understood Alice." "That's not an excuse," my father added quickly. "It's just the truth. Your interests, your talents, your way of seeing the world, it was all so different from anything we knew. We didn't know how to connect with you. So, we took the easier path of focusing on Alice. And then when you moved to New York and built this amazing life and career," my mother continued, "we felt like we'd lost the chance to be part of your world. We didn't know how to bridge that gap." Their words weren't perfect. There were still traces of the old patterns, the implication that my difference was somehow the problem, the subtle centering of their feelings over mine. But there was also genuine remorse, and more importantly, a willingness to acknowledge the reality I had lived with for so long. "I needed you to see me," I said simply. "Not compare me, not try to change me, just see me and love me for who I am." "We do love you," my mother insisted, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "We always have. We just didn't know how to show it in a way you could feel." Daniel, who had been quietly supportive throughout the conversation, spoke up. "I think what India is saying, and what I hope for both of you, is that it's not too late to learn." The dinner ended with no dramatic resolutions or tearful group hugs. Real healing, I was coming to understand, wasn't a single moment but a process, a commitment to showing up differently. Day after day, over the next few months, that commitment was tested and proven in small ways. My mother began sending articles about design that made her think of me. My father asked questions about my current projects, and actually listened to the answers. They made their first visit to our Brooklyn apartment and stood in genuine awe at the wall displaying our book covers and awards. 3 months after our dinner in New York, Daniel and I decided to do something that surprised even us. We planned a small ceremony to renew our vows, this time with our families present. It wasn't the lavish affair of Alice's wedding, just 30 people in the garden of a small Brooklyn restaurant on the anniversary of our City Hall marriage, but it was filled with meaning. Alice stood beside me as my matron of honor. My father walked me down the aisle, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, and my mother read a poem she had written for the occasion, acknowledging the past while embracing a new future. As Daniel and I recited the same vows we had exchanged 6 years earlier, I felt my grandmother's presence more strongly than ever. The ring she had left me, the ring that had secretly represented our marriage for years, gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. A symbol of both continuity and transformation, that day marked not an ending but a beginning. A new chapter in my relationship with my family based on authenticity rather than expectations, on being seen rather than being compared. In the years since, our healing has continued, imperfect but real. There are still moments of falling into old patterns, still occasional hurts. But there is also a new foundation of truth and mutual respect. That allows us to address these moments directly rather than letting them fester. What I've learned through this journey is that family love isn't always intuitive or automatic. Sometimes it must be deliberately cultivated, challenged, and reconstructed. I've learned that standing in your truth, even when it causes temporary discomfort, is ultimately more loving than perpetuating comfortable illusions. Most importantly, I've learned that happiness isn't something that can be given to you by others' approval or withheld by their lack of understanding. True happiness comes from building a life aligned with your own values and surrounding yourself with people who see you clearly and love you fully for exactly who you are. My relationship with my family continues to evolve, strengthened by honest communication and mutual effort. Daniel and I have built our creative agency together, merging our talents just as we've merged our lives. And I no longer hide any part of myself in any room I enter, carrying both my grandmother's wisdom and my own hard-won self-acceptance wherever I go. If there's one thing I could tell anyone struggling to be seen within their family, It's this: your value doesn't diminish because someone fails to see it. Your light doesn't dim because someone turns away. And your story doesn't end with other people's limitations. It begins with your courage to live authentically, even when that means standing alone. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself within your own family? Or have you experienced the freedom that comes from finally being truly seen? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be seen for exactly who they are. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And remember, your story is always worth telling, even if not everyone is ready to hear it. A glamorous wedding reception in a grand ballroom with white roses and crystal glasses. A woman in her early 30s standing apart with a polite smile. Hiding sadness while her family laughs together. Cinematic lighting, emotional contrast.